All right, let's dive right in. Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to unravel what is honestly one of my absolute favorite cosmic detective stories. It's a mystery that has been low-key driving astrophysicists crazy for decades. We are talking about how galaxies, those massive, majestic pinwheels of light, actually maintain their iconic shapes over literally billions of years. We're going to look at something called the spiral winding problem, and then we'll explore a totally mind-bending proposed solution to it. It involves something known as a hidden vacuum scaffold.
To really wrap our heads around this mystery, we have to start with a deceptively simple question. Why don't spiral galaxies just wind themselves up? I mean, think about basic orbital mechanics for a second. The stuff closer to the center of a galactic disk spins way faster than the stuff out on the edges. So if those beautiful spiral arms were just fixed, solid clumps of stars, kind of holding hands as they spun, that difference in speed would violently tear them apart. In just a few galactic rotations, they would wind up incredibly tight, literally like spaghetti twisting onto a fork. But when we look out into the deep universe, they don't do that. They just hold their beautiful, open shapes.
So standard astrophysics gives us a really clever workaround for this called density wave theory. The easiest way to think about it is like a massive traffic jam on a highway. You know the cars on the highway are always moving forward? They hit the traffic jam, they bunch up and slow down, and then eventually they accelerate and drive out the other side. But the traffic jam itself, the actual pattern of congestion, stays in the exact same spot on the road, even though the individual cars making it up are constantly changing. Standard density wave theory basically says that stars and gas are just the cars. They orbit through the spiral arms, but the arm itself is just this persistent traffic jam of density.
Which sounds great, right? But here's the catch, and this is a really fundamental gap in the theory. What sustains the pattern itself? Sure, density wave theory perfectly explains how stars move through the arms, but it doesn't really explain why that cosmic traffic jam stays so perfectly organized on a massive, global scale for billions of years. If the stars themselves aren't actively holding the shape together, what invisible force is keeping this incredibly coherent structure alive? The standard models rely heavily on local, nearby physics, but as it turns out, there might be a significantly deeper, way more profound answer.
Enter the plot twist. This brings us to a relatively new framework called dynamic vacuum field theory, or DVFT. In this model, the universe actually has a hidden architectural framework holding it together, primarily through something called a Kibble-Zurek defect. Now, I know, that sounds super intimidating. The technical definition is a topologically protected frozen phase mismatch, but we don't need to get bogged down in the dense quantum math here. Basically, just think of it as an invisible track, a permanent scaffold embedded directly into the fundamental vacuum of space itself. In this view, the visible galaxy isn't actually creating the spiral pattern at all. It's just resting inside this pre-existing invisible groove in the universe.
Let's trace how the heck this invisible cosmic scaffold actually got there, going all the way from the early universe down to the stars we see today. It all starts in the primordial universe with this ultra-rapid transition called a tachyonic rolldown. As the hot early universe expanded and cooled, it tried to settle into a stable state, but it couldn't synchronize perfectly everywhere at once. That lack of perfect synchronization, a process called KZ freeze-out, actually locked in these permanent mismatches. It created a literal phase winding baked right into the vacuum. Over time, that winding acted as a lasting gravitational scaffold. And then finally, normal visible matter, the baryonic stuff, gas and stars, fell into those invisible grooves, lighting up as the glowing spiral arms we see right now.
What this theory really predicts is that there are two totally distinct regimes of gravity operating within a single galaxy. Think of the inner disk as a high acceleration zone. In there, standard normal gravity from visible matter absolutely rules the day. The stars and gas are completely in control. But when you travel out to the far outer edges of the galactic disk, the acceleration becomes incredibly weak. The normal gravitational pull from the visible matter fades away, and suddenly, the gas becomes hypersensitive to that underlying vacuum scaffold. Out in the boondocks of the galaxy, the invisible architecture basically takes the wheel.
So, let's look at the evidence from NGC 5068.
Because we obviously need a smoking gun, right? Astronomers decided to test this two-regime dynamic in the real world. They pointed the ultra-sensitive Meerkat radio telescope at a nearby superactive star-forming galaxy called NGC 5068. When they looked at the mass breakdown of its hydrogen gas, its HI, they found the vast majority of it sits predictably in the regular inner disk. But if you look at the warped outer disk and this really weird, clumpy, anomalous gas on the fringes, together they make up only about 10.8% of the total detected hydrogen mass. But do not let that small number fool you. It's barely 11% of the mass, sure, but because it sits out in that weak acceleration regime, it holds literally 100% of the clues we need to prove the scaffold exists.
Let's contrast those two zones. If you're just looking at the inner disk, where all the major star formation is happening, it looks exactly like you'd expect. It's neat, it's tidy, it's rotating in step with the stars. Normal physics explains it perfectly. But the second you step past that boundary into the weak field outer regime, the hydrogen gas goes completely rogue. It becomes wildly warped, it's tilted, it's broken up into these anomalous, disconnected clumps. It is blatantly obvious that the outer gas is not playing by the same rules as the tidy inner disk.
And this stark geometric mismatch is the exact problem for standard models. I mean, we are looking at total geometric dissonance here. If the entire galaxy was really just one continuous density wave driven purely by the stars inside, the outer gas should logically align with the inner disk, but it absolutely doesn't. The gas completely breaks away from the inner geometry. This practically proves that just relying on an inner density wave interpretation is totally incomplete. Something else is out there aggressively pulling that outer gas out of alignment.
Let's put a hard number on that mismatch to really show how crazy it is. 61.6 degrees. That is the axial position angle shift between the inner optical disk and the outer gas component. Think about that. A sudden, 60+ degree twist in the physical orientation of a galaxy's gas is just staggering. You literally cannot organically grow a twist like that from the neat, tightly correlated rotation of the inner stars. That outer gas is clearly marching to the beat of a totally different cosmic drum.
And hey, it isn't just twisting, it's tilting too. There is a 17.3 degree inclination shift as well. The inner disk sits comfortably at about a 35-degree tilt, but then the outer gas steeply ramps up to roughly 53 degrees. This just definitively shows us that the gas out there on the edges is not a simple continuation of the central galaxy. It is following a completely different architecture. According to DFFT, it's literally settling into the pre-carved grooves of that weak field Kibble-Zurich defect scaffold.
So, tallying up the scorecard, the net evidence is incredibly compelling. Everything pulling to one side. The regular rotation, the neat local star formation feedback, that all happens in the inner disk and totally supports standard physics. We expect that. But look at the outer forces, the massive angle mismatches, the bizarrely clumpy gas, the complete lack of any stellar counterpart to hold that outer gas together. These outer features heavily favor the presence of that invisible DVFT scaffold guiding the matter.
Which brings us to a falsifiable future. Because look, this is real science. We can't just throw our hands up, say an invisible track does it, and call it a day. Real science requires falsifiable predictions. Astronomers are now able to rigorously test this exact theory using a strict 3-step mathematical process on raw velocity data from radio telescopes. Step 1, define the mathematical phase of the predicted spiral scaffold. Step 2, define the residual velocity field. Basically, you take the observed movement of the gas and you mathematically subtract every single movement caused by the normal, visible matter. Just strip it all away. Step 3, compute the correlation between the leftover, unexplained movement and the theoretical scaffold.
And it all comes down to a very specific, definitive numerical threshold, the DVFT criterion. It states that after you subtract all the normal gravitational effects of the visible matter, the remaining phase amplitude of the gas absolutely must be greater than 0.25. If it hits that mark, boom, the residual field mathematically confirms a coherent phase scaffold, proving the invisible track. But if it's lower than that, then ordinary physics and just random gas accretion are totally enough to explain everything, and the scaffold theory is out.
Which leaves us with this incredible final takeaway. Stars move through the pattern. The vacuum winding sustains the pattern. The brilliant stars we see stretching across the night sky might not actually be the architects of their own magnificent spiral galaxies at all. They might just be illuminating an invisible primordial geometry etched into the very fabric of the universe during its first frantic moments of existence. So the next time you see a photograph of a glowing spiral galaxy, I want you to ask yourself, are you actually looking at the structure, or are you just looking at the lights draped over an invisible ancient scaffold? Something to think about.